Hey everybody, mel0n here. Welcome back to another episode of the mel0n Review. Today we're going to be checking out yet another pad from InfinityMice, who were kind enough to send over their brand new Ruin mousepad. Now the Ruin is their brand new limited edition mousepad. I believe it is the same surfacing as their InfinitySpeed Pad, but just with a fancier art on it. Now this is a very interesting pad because I've already checked out a couple of InfinityMice's pads in the past. I checked out the SHOGUN and the Control V2, both of which were more on the Control hybrid side, so I'm very interested to see how a more speed optimized pad of theirs feels and how it compares to those other pads. So today we're going to be doing a quick unboxing and first impressions of the InfinityMice Ruin. I will have a full, much more in-depth review of this pad coming out in a couple weeks after I have time to do some more testing, but today's is going to be a quick unboxing and first impressions. But that's enough about housekeeping. Let's go ahead and get right into it. Alrighty, now in terms of pricing and specs, this is a limited edition of pad, as I mentioned before, so it's similar to the SHOGUN. Now again, I'm pretty sure this is just a clone of the InfinitySpeed Pad, but I will confirm that for the full review. But it is up for pre-order right now on InfinityMice's website if you would like to get one for yourself. Now it comes in two sizes. There is a 490 by 420 and a 490 by 490 version. Both of them are 4mm thick, so same thickness as the Control V2 and the SHOGUN. Both retail for 70 Canadian dollars, which is definitely a little on the higher side, but given the art on this pad, that is understandable. If I'm not mistaken, this is similar pricing to the SHOGUN, which was another one of their limited edition art pads, so this is keeping in line with the pricing. Now, according to InfinityMice, the Ruin is a speed pad with a very smooth glide and, according to them, perfect dynamic friction, which is a very interesting claim. It has a non-coated performance surface. It also has below surface stitching and a custom IPU base, similar to the previous InfinityMice pads as well. Now, as I just mentioned, it is 4mm thick, which is keeping in line with the thickness of the other InfinityMice pads. Now, the thickness can be a bit of a double-edged sword because it can have a lot of really good benefits in terms of performance, but it can also have some negatives in terms of skate performance, but I'll talk about that more later in this video. But of course, this is what InfinityMice is saying about their own product, so let's go ahead and unbox it and see how this pad actually feels. Now, inside the packaging, we have the Ruin itself, and it also came with this like little playing card pack. Now, for those of you who don't know, I used to collect Pokemon cards and I love shiny cardboard, so I cracked this open and I actually was lucky enough to get this like full hollow Gundam card. Now, I remember InfinityMice saying something about these a while ago when the Ruin was first announced, but I honestly completely forgot about it. This is kind of similar to what Pulsar does, where a lot of their mice come with that playing card and sometimes you can get like a really rare one, but I really like this here on the Ruin just because it's a cool little thing to include and it's very unique. I'm going to put this in like a hard card in the sleeve just to hold on to it because it's kind of a cool little memoir, but this is a really nice thing to see included with the Ruin. I really do like this. But enough about the shiny cardboard, let's talk about the Ruin itself. Now, firstly, I just have to go here and say I love the design of this pad. The colors are gorgeous, the art is super cool, and this like Pacific Rim Gundam-esque design is just so cool. This is such a nice change of pace from all like the countless anime pads we see on the market. This pad looks amazing, and I absolutely love the art on it. It's very similar to the SHOGUN, where I love the art on that pad as well, but this one just hits a little different because it's got that like Pacific Rim Gundam vibe to it. The surface's X and Y axis also seems to be very well balanced. Even for more dynamic like X and Y axis negative movements, it still feels very balanced across the board. I'll do a much more in-depth comparison on the surfacing and the stitching and all that kind of stuff for the full review, of course, but just based off first impressions, it does seem very solid. The edge stitching is the same as it was in the SHOGUN and the Control V2, which is a good thing. I had no issues with the edge stitching on those pads, and I'm happy to see the same stitching here on these pads. The base is also the same custom IPU base that was on the SHOGUN and the Control V2, which is a very good thing. Now, in terms of softness, this is where the Ruin is very different compared to the other InfinityMice pads. This pad is very soft, much more soft than Control V2 and the SHOGUN. The softness here on the Ruin reminds me a lot of the softness you found on the LGG Neptune, where you can kind of press through the pad, where you press in there, the foam doesn't really fight you. What really fights you is the surface of your desk. So you have that feeling where you can kind of push through the pad. That is very similar to what we see here on the Ruin. Now, because the pad is so soft and so thick, I will most likely not be able to use dot skates on this pad. I had the same situation with the Control V2 and the SHOGUN, where dot skates just couldn't account for the depth of the pad, and it's going to be the same situation here, most likely, where I can't use dot skates, but that's okay. I'll find a solution to work around that. Now, another thing I wanted to know is that the Ruin is a very kind of limp pad, if that makes sense. The Control V2 and the SHOGUN did have a bit of rigidity to them, where if you kind of held them on an angle, a corner of the pad would sit up, but with the Ruin, it just curves down. There's no like rigidity to the pad itself because it's so soft. Now, this is because the base of the Ruin is a much more aerated, softer foam than it is in the Control V2, which makes sense because on the Ruin, they're going for a much speedier focused surface, and they're having the control be dependent on the softness of the pad. Again, very similar to the LGG Neptune. It doesn't affect the performance in any way, shape, or form. I just figured it was something worth noting. But overall, the Ruin feels very solid. Again, there's a lot of things here that are carried over from the previous InfinityMice pads. They've done very well, and the surfacing is very unique, and I'm very interested to see how it performs. As I mentioned before, I love the design. The design is a 10 out of 10 for me. me, but what really matters is the performance. So I'm going to go do a couple runs on Kovacs to see how the Ruin feels in game, and then I'll be back for some final thoughts. Now, like I theorized earlier, unfortunately I was not able to use dot skates on this pad just because the dot skates can't account for the depth and the softness of the Ruin, so I'm going to have to use donut skates and full-size stock skates for my review in this pad, which is fine. I don't really mind changing out the skates a little bit, but keep in mind dot skates are not going to be usable on this pad. So for testing here, since I can't use the regular dot skates, I broke out my old Pulsar X2H and used the Obsidian donut skates, and those worked very, very well. Now, one thing I did not expect from the Ruin is how good it was going to perform. Now, generally speaking, I perform best on hybrid and control pads, but I was actually able to absolutely obliterate an old PB I had on Kovacs intro scenario. And keep in mind, I've had this PB for like almost a year now, and I think I played this scenario like close to 2,000 times. And after only 6 runs on Kovacs intro scenario with the Ruin, I obliterated that old PB by a significant margin. Now, generally speaking, this does not happen ever. Again, I've been pretty much hard stuck in this scenario for almost a year, and the fact that I was able to blow past my PB by such a significant margin is very impressive. I don't know if this is just new pad bias, but the performance of this pad is insane. Now, of course, with this like crazy jump in performance, I'm a little skeptical about long-term performance because, again, new pad buff only lasts like a day or two, so I'm very interested to see how this works in long term, but I'll have to see how it holds out over testing. All right, but overall, I am very, very impressed with the Ruin. I've really enjoyed using InfinityMice's previous pads, the Control V2 and the Shogun, but there is something special about the Ruin here that just blows those pads out of the water, and the performance I'm getting here on this pad seems to be insane, more so than I've seen in any other pad I've tried before. So I'm very, very interested to see how this pad holds out. So far, I'm incredibly impressed. This pad is definitely a very, very surprising pad, but we'll have to see how it holds out over testing. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I will have a much more in-depth review of the Ruin coming out in a couple weeks once I have time to do some more long-term testing. I'll be talking about what this pad's good for, what this pad's not good for, how it works in different environments, how the long-term performance holds out, and a bunch of other things. So if you want to see a much more in-depth dive about the Ruin, be sure to get subscribed so you don't miss the full review coming in a couple weeks. But that is everything for today. Thank you very much again to InfinityMice for sending the Ruin out for me to take a look at. I greatly appreciate it. Thank you again for watching, and I will catch you guys in the next episode of the mel0n Review. Peace.